I had to make a decision whether I wanted to do it or not. It was based on the story, but also it was based on whether or not I felt comfortable doing it.
Coming into this world as the son of the illustrious Desi Arnaz Sr. and Lucille Ball, and into a life of royalty, may seem to be the stuff of Hollywood dreams. But there is a narrative of hardship and anguish beneath the smiles and the glitz. Even as a young boy, he struggled with invisible struggles, hidden burdens that were illuminated only by the spotlight of the stage. Still, all that changed was a single insight. Despite his celebrity and wealth, what was it exactly that made his life so unbearable? Impact of the spotlight on Desi Jr. Desi Arnaz Jr. was famous the second he popped a cherry. What happens when everyone wants you to be as charming, hilarious, and flawless as your parents were in their roles? His birth was hailed on the cover of TV Guide, and the whole country watched as little Ricky from I Love Lucy came into this world. It was a lot of stress for Desi Jr. He was more than a mere youngster. He was a member of television's elite. Even while he benefited from his parents' fame, it wasn't without cost. Envision being born into a society where every expression, gaffe, and adolescent defiance is scrutinized by adoring admirers and tabloids. I Love Lucy was a defining moment in American television, and Desi Jr. spent his childhood living in its enduring shadow. However, that legacy wasn't always a boon. With the public comparing a kid's every action to his parents' comedic brilliance, how could the youngster ever measure up to their expectations? Desi Jr. had a hard time finding his identity among all the attention he was receiving as the realization of Lucille Ball and Desi Sr.'s hopes. His biological parents, Lucy and Desi, were required to prove that he was more than just a boy. The reality behind the scenes was everything from the picture-perfect paradise that Americans loved in their sitcoms. Desi Jr. often felt like an observer in his own life, observing as his parents' professions devoured them. The comedy on television was often accompanied by domestic strife, including disagreements, miscommunications, and the continual need to maintain their flawless public personas. Even though he was emotionally distraught, he learned to put on a brave front for the cameras. There was mounting strain with every public appearance and red carpet event. He knew from a young age that millions of people looked to him to continue the I Love Lucy tradition that his parents had painstakingly laid the groundwork for. However, lurking underneath his cheerful exterior is a doubt. Can he ever be sufficient? The pressure of the renown his family had worked so hard to achieve started to sink in on Desi Jr. with each camera roll. The name that was both cherished and burdened with immense expectation was a source of great pride. Living up to the Hollywood standard was just part of the pressure. He also felt pressure to emulate his parents' achievements. But how can you forge your own path when everyone is content to call you the son of? As Desi Jr. entered his teenage years, the expectations placed on him to uphold the family's reputation intensified, leading him to rebel and seek his own identity outside from the regimented world of Hollywood aristocracy. Once a beacon of light, the spotlight has become a prison of unending scrutiny and unrealistic expectations. Being the only child of Lucille Ball was perhaps the most difficult aspect of growing up. Certainly there were glamorous parties and devoted followers, but none understood the true hardships endured by a young man who yearned to be recognized for who he really was, rather than for the image society projected of him. He yearned for a life away from the spotlight, away from the constant scrutiny, where he could be just Desi and not little Ricky or Desi Jr. After a hard day behind the camera, however, the impact it would have on his future was unknown to him at the time. Not only was he becoming a famous person, but he was also becoming a guy who would struggle with substance abuse, depression, and the never-ending quest to find who he is. Scars that no camera could record were left by Desi Jr.'s early life setbacks, which followed him into adulthood. But nobody knew that the worst was still to come. The disclosures that would rock his life were still to come. Beyond inheriting a renowned name, Desi Arnaz Jr. had a whole lot of pressure to live up to, as well as an unruly family. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz Sr. a Hollywood golden couple, had a rocky relationship that affected Desi Jr.'s upbringing. Desi Jr. looked up to his parents when he was little, but as he got older, he felt a growing pain between their desire to keep him safe and his desire for freedom. Indeed, Lucille Ball loved her son with all her heart, but that love was cloaked in layers of control. Lucille, ever the protective mother, sought to save Desi Jr. from the same traps that Desi Sr. had fallen into when they were famous. That overprotectiveness, meanwhile, was stifling to Desi Jr. when he was a teenager. As he grew up in a world where everyone was watching, Lucille's presence appeared to obstruct his way at every turn. So it was understandable that he wanted to escape Lucille's clutches, but the only way to do so was via a barrage of arguments and excruciating silences. Now we have Desi Arnaz Sr., the charismatic Cuban musician who enchanted Americans on screen with Lucille, but had a more troubled off-screen life. Strange admiring your distance dancing was a common theme in his connection with his kid. He and Desi Jr. were musical souls, but he couldn't escape his history. Desi Jr. was often caught in the middle of Lucille and Desi Sr. as tumultuous marriage. How can a son make sense of his father, who is idolized by millions, while he is at home and finds him unapproachable at times? Desi Jr. still wanted his dad to approve of him, but he had a hard time connecting with him due to his dad's struggles with drinking and the dissolution of his marriage to Lucille. As a true showman, Desi Jr.'s father could be wildly happy one minute and completely absent for long stretches during his troublesome mood swings, leaving him to feel completely abandoned. On the few occasions when they did connect, however, there was electricity, a glimpse of the connection that could have been. It's little wonder Desi Jr. felt a need for more than what he had in those momentary glances, especially given his resentment at the emptiness his father had always created. Desi Jr. had to fight his way through the difficult process of developing an identity while caught between Lucille's oppressive grip and Desi Sr. as more erratic presence. How was he supposed to reconcile his parents' seemingly irreconcilable differences in outlook and upbringing? He struggled to accept the weight of being Lucy's boy and Desi's son, titles for which he had never tried out. Although to everyone else they may seem legendary, Desi Jr. frequently saw them as symbols of bewilderment, sadness, and yearning. These remained throughout Desi Jr.'s childhood and into adulthood, changing from marks to scars. The successes and failures of his parent-child connection had a profound impact on his identity and social skills. However, these problems really surfaced in his sexual life, leading to a series of troubled relationships that culminated in a bombshell revelation that no one saw coming. Desi Jr.'s unruly romance life. Desi Jr.'s love life was a labyrinth of broken hearts, public flings, and the pressures of carrying his renowned surname, which made his already troubled relationship with his parents seem much more convoluted. His relationships were so publicized and scrutinized by the media because he was dating like a Hollywood prince, not simply an ordinary actor. He seemed to be engulfed in a maelstrom of passion and anguish beginning in his teenage years. However, under the surface, several of his love victories reflected the inner struggles he faced. Patty Duke, a famous Hollywood actress in her own right, was Desi Jr.'s first and most important romantic partner. Not only did their celebrity power make their relationship a phenomenon, but their age difference also played a role. Patty was in her 20s when Desi Jr. began seeing her. He was 17 years old. Even though his family was the ones putting the most pressure on him, the connection was the center of public attention. Lucille Ball was quite possessive and made her disapproval of the relationship clear. The strain was intolerable for a young Desi, who had to go through all these conflicting emotions of love and allegiance. If following his heart meant going against his beloved mother, how could he do it? After a tumultuous affair with Patty Duke ended, Desi Jr.'s life was anything from smooth sailing. The demands of fame and his obviously renowned family eventually got to him, and he ended his relationship with Liza Minnelli, another Hollywood star. Even in love, he had to deal with the weight of his family's expectations and the difficulty of breaking out from his parents' mold. Could any relationship withstand such intense scrutiny? Desi Jr.'s marriage was full of passion and agony, and his subsequent marriages were no different. His marriages to Amy Laura Bargiel and Linda Pearl were marred by his inability to shake the demons of his past. On top of worrying that he wasn't as charming as his father, he carried about the weight of his mother's criticism. When one's heart is still in the middle of guiding a troubled child, how can one establish a foundation? Amidst all these heartbreaks, Desi Jr.'s life would be forever altered by one connection, an affair typical of his stormy romantic history. But underneath his composed exterior, there was a revelation significant enough to alter his path. Desi Jr.'s journey was more about discovering who he was than about finding love. Unexpectedly, his journey would bring him face to face with a startling truth. In what way did this discovery completely upend his romantic life? In what ways did it alter his perception of his parents, his identity, and the heritage they had left him? Desi Jr. was on the cusp of a revelation that would cause him to reevaluate his whole worldview as he maneuvered through the twists and turns of familial and romantic relationships. Uncovering the truth of his background would be the ultimate consequence of this finding, the addiction and scandal of Desi Jr. As a child growing up in the shadow of Hollywood's spotlight, it's tempting to think that the stars must have it made. But underneath all that glitter, there was Desi Jr., something far more sinister than anything anyone had ever imagined. Even at an early age, Desi Jr. felt the burden of his family's heritage. He became entangled in a battle with addiction as he sought a method to escape from it. When did his downfall start, and what spectral truths were hidden under his anguish? It was when he was a teenager, immersed in the identity crisis that all kids experience. However, Desi Arnaz Jr. was learning to handle the pressures of being the son of two Hollywood heavy hitters. He was always carrying that weight. It wasn't even about avoiding the specters of Desi Sr.'s and Lucille Ball's domineering ways. It was about prevailing over them. Substance abuse had been his go-to method of evading the unending pressures of expectation and scrutiny. What began as a way out quickly became a downward spiral that he feared would engulf his whole existence. The difficulties Desi Jr. endured became more obvious as time went on. He became the tabloid hero who had failed to live up to his parents' perfect image as the scandals engulfed him. However, behind the surface of the headlines, there was a troubled young man who longed for a community that would remind him of his true identity. People saw the crazy side, but they didn't see the remorse, the broken relationships, and the never-ending battle with addiction. How did Desi Jr. get himself into this mess, and why did he have to wait so long to figure out how to get out? The timing was terrible, but it ultimately brought Desi Jr. face to face with his troubled history. He was aware that drink and narcotics provided an escape. They helped him to numb the pain of feeling inadequate to his parents. Somewhere in the thicket of addiction, a spark of optimism appeared. Without the transformation, he would have lost himself and everything else he cared about. It was the kind of battle that would drain his reserves of power. In order to confront the terrible truths he had suppressed for so long, Desi Jr. checked himself into a rehabilitation center and started the arduous journey of recovery. Giving up drugs wasn't the only thing he had to deal with. He also had to overcome emotional baggage from his past. Such encounters bring Desi Jr. face to face with a devastating reality that alters the trajectory of his whole existence. An epiphany that would reveal a familial history he had never known existed and reshape his view of his own vulnerabilities. During his lowest point, what was he going to learn? With this new knowledge, how did he manage to claw his way back from the brink? The answers were to be found in an unexpected discovery that would shake Desi Jr.'s foundational beliefs about his background. Desi Arnaz and the hope he found. Desi Arnaz Jr. sought solace from his sister Lucille Arnaz after years of anarchy. Desi Jr. didn't really grasp the power they had until he attempted to mend his life, even though their existence had always been entangled with the ups and downs of his family's renown. They discovered a profound bond that would alter the course of their lives irrevocably as they labored to secure their parents' legacy. But how can forming a new friendship lead to the disclosure of secrets they never knew existed? Though they shared a home as children, Lucy and Desi Jr. had quite different lives. Sense of duty, of continuing her mother's graceful and charming legacy, was always there with Lucy. The burden of bearing his father's name was something that Desi Jr. had to deal with constantly. However, it wasn't until they were adults that they realized their challenges were really very similar. Lucy had been an anchor for Desi Jr. during his recovery. She reminded him that he and his family still had to deal with the consequences of their past. In the midst of dealing with the effects of fame on their family, they set out on a shared mission to honor their parents' legacy. As a team, they were delving into scripts, letters, and home films, all of which served as artifacts and memories of their parents, whom they adored but never really understood. These were the times when kids learned about more than only their parents' achievements, and the hardships and sacrifices that went along with them. It was a path that would unite them in love but also lead to a discovery that would cast doubt on their shared assumptions. An unpleasant reality of their parents' life-defining marriage was confronted by Lucy and Desi Jr. The story's holes were apparent once they could piece it together. These were the long-kept secrets and hardships endured by Lucille and Desi Sr. What was astonishing, however, was the extent to which these hidden scars had crept into their lives and tarnished everything. Their perception of their family was completely turned on its head by this discovery, which also gave them a new level of healing as a unit. There was hope, nevertheless, because of disclosures and shared grief. Not content to just carry on his renowned parents' legacy, Desi Jr. discovered a new calling as a brother, father, and man, determined to vanquish the demons from his past. He clung to his bond with Lucy as she gently reminded him that true family isn't defined by the anecdotes passed down through generations, but by the tales they weave together. What, however, was the hidden truth that sent shockwaves through Lucy and Desi Jr.? How does everything change the legacy they were familiar with? Does Desi Jr., who has been on a quest for inner calm his whole life, ultimately find it at this time? Desi Jr. and Lucy stood at the intersection of their parents' stories past and future as the pieces started to fit together. It was a location where the truth, no matter how painful, provided a chance at forgiveness. The fight against Desi Jr.'s heavy legacies. Desi Arnaz Jr.'s surname was a godsend and a burden. It was his passport to stardom, something he had never desired but from which he felt he could never escape. As a child, Desi Jr. felt he had to constantly live in comparison to his famous parents, which made it difficult for him to forge his own identity. With the burden of his name, Desi Arnaz Jr., hanging over every move, where exactly would he end up? Would anybody ever take him seriously, or would his family's narrative always take precedence? Desi Jr. had aspirations of surpassing his parents in the entertainment field, so he pursued acting and singing at a higher level. He has been in many films and TV series in the past. His own band, Dino, Desi, and Billy, had some success in the 60s as well. Even with his successes, hints of his talent were always there. He's not Desi Arnaz Sr., but he's terrific. The parallels persisted indefinitely. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz Sr., those enormous giants, nonetheless appeared to overshadow each victory. Maybe it was because he couldn't find a place to fit in since no one would let him be himself. Throughout his life, Desi Jr.'s participation with Jamestown, New York's Lucille Ball Desi Arnaz Center has been the most illuminating. It was a double-edged blade, but he put his all into keeping his parents' illustrious television accomplishments alive. Although it was a touching homage to a family that changed the course of television, Desi Jr. saw it as more proof of the grandeur he will never achieve. He was paying homage to the past, but that didn't advance his plot. Could he ever stop being an emotional ward of his parents' memories and start living his own life? Throughout his career, Desi Jr. attempted to play a game that appeared to prefer its recollections of his parents above any novel ideas he could have had. The fact that he may have credited his family with inspiring him to pursue acting and music as his own creative paths is often overlooked by critics. The tale of his attempts to fill shoes that no one had ever believed he could stay in his mind, an epiphany that would rock Desi Jr. to his very core, arrived amid the annoyance and a realm of deep uncertainty. Years later, Desi Jr. freely confessed to a reporter, "I didn't know what I wanted because I was fighting so hard not to be my parents' son." He had never asked himself what he loved or what made him happy because he had been so consumed by the need to not be a famous son. However, that crazy revelation did reveal the truth. He had been escaping the shadow, which would always be a part of him. Perhaps he didn't need to run anymore. Desi Jr.'s realization liberated him from a previous perspective on his life and legacy. Rather than viewing his last name as a weight to carry, he now saw it as a platform upon which he could build, rather than be buried. He came to realize that his love for music, his desire to preserve his parents' history, and those peaceful moments of creation could now exist harmoniously with the pride he felt for his family's accomplishments. The question that remained was whether this would be sufficient to grant him the inner peace he had sought for so long, or if the weight of his parents' legacy continued to weigh him down. Unfortunately, the answer isn't so easily black and white, as is frequently the case with many other matters in Hollywood. Have you finally found the peace Desi Jr. sought, or is the weight of his family's legacy still too heavy to bear? Share your thoughts in the comments. Does fame leave a blessing or a curse? Desi Arnaz Jr. A.'s story is a reminder that fame isn't always a picnic. What with his battles with addiction and embracing his role as a guardian of his parents' legacy,